I'm Kathleen Culhane, President of Non-Traditional Employment for Women, or NEW. I want to give a huge thanks to Chris, Daphne, Greg, and Ellie for that great conversation. At NEW, we've been placing women in green economy jobs, namely careers in the skilled construction trades, the plumbers and electricians our last panel spoke of, for decades. And we would not be able to do so without great supporters working to ensure career opportunities are available for all in the green economy. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives for the City of New York, in conversation with Donnel Baird, founder and CEO of BlocPower. While we're waiting on Donnel, greetings, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So I know that you and Donnel are going to have a conversation. We would love to hear a little bit from you in terms of your history with green economy jobs, what brings you to this conversation, and what you're thinking of for the immediate opportunities that I know you're so enthralled about.
Well, thank you. I first came to understand what green jobs are in 2005. I was a college professor of planning, and I was working in New Orleans on rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina with a bunch of community organizations and Catholic charities and enterprise community partners, and the AFL-CIO pension arm of the building trades called HIPBIT. And there were a lot of job opportunities on rebuilding the city, but a lot of those jobs were terrible, and they hired undocumented immigrants from Central America and didn't even provide them masks, and going into buildings with mold, and people were getting sick and literally living in abandoned cars under Interstate Highway 10 because there was no housing for them. And the AFL-CIO set up 6 job training centers to really train people and improve the quality of work in the rebuilding. And at those job training centers, the average reading and math level for adults walking into those centers was 4th grade. And the unions didn't have the capacity to do the kind of in-depth remedial basic education and training that was needed. And for me, it was a wake-up call on a lot of levels as to what's really required to do green jobs in an inclusive and just way. So that was like my introduction. In 2008, late in the summer, I was asked by the Obama transition team if I could help pull together some ideas for what they thought they were going to win. And they wanted some ideas for what they might do once they got in office. And so we went out and got a foundation grant and commissioned about 20 papers or proposals for what they should do. And the one Obama's team liked the most was retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency across the country and focusing on training inner city young people of color to do a lot of that work. So I joined with a labor leader, Jerry Hudson, who's from New York, who's now Secretary Treasurer of SEIU, with an activist academic from University of Wisconsin, Joel Rogers, and with the National Building Trades head at the time, Mark Ayers. And we created a nonprofit called Emerald Cities Collaborative to actually work on this project, very similar to what Daphne's doing now. And our agenda was what is now called the Green New Deal, essentially. And that is the need to address both bad jobs or no jobs and climate change at the same time. And the need for that has only increased since 2008.
And I see Donnel has joined us, so I'll leave you two to it. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I've been on the Zoom for an hour. I'm not sure why I wasn't able to participate. Deputy Mayor Thompson, good to see you. What would you say that you've learned over the last 10 years, and how has the vision of what Emerald City is trying to bring to the fore, how has that changed, if at all? Particularly as we head into this new century, this new decade. As you may know, to be blunt, a lot of funders, a lot of folks in the foundation world, they say, look, green jobs, we've been there, we've done that, we tried it, we made investments during 2008, 2009, it didn't work out. So what's different? What are they not understanding about what the new opportunities are? How can we help them along?
I think the first thing we learned in Emerald Cities was the need for broad, a movement building approach. We started off thinking that, if we just go in and make an argument about how people can save money on conservation, whether energy or water, that would be enough. And what we learned was that we really need to start at the very beginning of how big in scope this problem is in terms of carbon, and how if we don't make change, there are going to be bad things that are going to happen. And also on the other side, what opportunities exist if we go about it in the right way. And that just takes a lot of education. Few people understood, banks didn't understand how to finance it, didn't know how to think about it. Very few people understood how things like microgrids, if they're community owned, could become wealth generating for low income communities. If communities pair that with organizing people to conserve energy and sell energy from their microgrids to the grid, the larger grid, during peak hours in the afternoons, things like that, folks had no concept of. And without this upfront popular education, we couldn't get cities or counties or states to change policies. On the funder side or the foundation side, we were asked questions like, how many green jobs will there be? And I think that's kind of like asking how many police departments are going to retrain their officers to take a community-oriented policing approach. The answer depends on whether we keep building the movement. It's not something that can be answered in the abstract, and it's the wrong question. The question should be, how can we strengthen the movement for green jobs? How do we do that? And that will provide the pathway to an answer of how many jobs there are going to be. It's not something that industry, it's not a technical question. It's a political question. It's a question of will. It's a question of popular understanding.
How do you think that about the job standards and the credentializations? The last panel, Daphne spoke a little bit about, how credentials need to change. One of the things we've been looking at is how the relationship between energy efficiency and COVID-19 reduction in many of our buildings, right? If you open up windows and increase air circulation to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in an apartment building, you may be increasing the energy burden, but there's new technologies you can install. So now when an energy efficiency auditor does an audit of an apartment building, they need to balance this need to have fresh, clean air, where the COVID-19 may be removed and not be circulated by the building's HVAC system, with the energy efficiency. And so, you would have this worker who's been trained on not only energy efficiency analysis, but also public health and COVID-19 mitigation strategies. How do you think about the work standards and the job qualifications that are necessary as we move forward over the next 10 years? How is that changing?
I actually think that we have to elevate workforce training and development to one of the key levers in bringing about a greener economy and a healthier economy. The kind of work Chris Collins does, for example. in my own home, we bought a smart heating system that actually adjusts measures the outside temperature, and it adjusts the indoor heat and air circulation according to what's going on outside. It's not been working for the last 3 days. We've had cold showers and no heat. And the reason is because the programmer who programmed the system didn't contemplate swings in cold air at night and heat during the day that we're experiencing now. That's related to climate change. And so the system breaks down because of the external shock, essentially, of temperatures due to climate change. And the key is actually having programmers who are trained and having workers, plumbers who are trained. And the same goes for home care workers who take care of elderly people in their house. You know, they need to be trained to understand all about indoor quality, air quality as well. And the contractors who come into the house have to be trained both on health and energy in order to actually maximize health and maximize savings at the same time. As I know that's the kind of work you do, but it requires really critical education, I call it. And that is training people at a high level, at all levels, on how to actually think about complexity, how to actually build systems that take into account, unforeseen events.
Yep.
So to me, it's a thoroughgoing challenge that we have that goes from DOE to CUNY to our colleges to our workforce training programs and so on.
And I think it's such an exciting opportunity for Green City Force alum to be able to have those jobs and to own the small businesses that are gonna, actually implement these green infrastructure and smart home and smart building upgrades challenges. So not just to be employees, but to be owners of their own minority women-owned businesses that do this work. And so when you look at large policy initiatives which you've led at the New York City government, such as community hire, the recent project labor agreements, how you all are thinking about the Climate Mobilization Act at City Hall. How do you see the intersection of these new kinds of jobs that you're talking about with these massive policies that the New York City government and the de Blasio administration has led?
Well, we think that the energy sector presents opportunities. The green sector presents opportunities in part because it's not already established and you don't have like 50 entrenched, organizations, dug in and fighting you every step of the way because they've been doing it their way for 100 years and they don't want to change. So in one sense, we have an opportunity to actually make the economy more fair and equitable, the green economy from Jump Street. But in our recent project labor agreement, we took on established industry in construction, and the building trades voluntarily agreed that 30% of all construction work be done by residents of high poverty zip codes or NYCHA. And we think this ought to be the policy, not just for construction jobs, but for all city contracts. And we're pushing for state legislation, a Community Hire Act, that would enable that. In construction alone, that means 24,000 job opportunities for people in these neighborhoods in the next 4 years. If we get the legislation, it can be a lot more than that. And we think that green jobs ought to be done this way, but it's just a general way of thinking. We can leverage the buying power, contracting power of city and state government to literally eliminate poverty. And that is something the green jobs effort just makes visible for everybody. We can do this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an extraordinary vision that you and the mayor have outlined to potentially, dramatically reduce or even eliminate poverty in New York City. And, New Yorkers are ambitious, and this is certainly an ambitious goal. I think my last quick question is not an easy one, it's a hard one, which is what do you think is the hardest element of the green jobs vision? Like, what is the most complicated and most difficult to achieve component of implementing this green jobs vision, whether it's from a policy standpoint, a financing standpoint, an employment standpoint? What do you think where do you think the biggest challenge is? And then we'll move to an audience question if we have time.
I think the biggest challenge is actually imagination and creativity. One of the reasons I so like you and I like people like Ellie and I love Daphne, even though I don't know them, is because you all are bringing new ideas to the table. And we need that. New York City has 520 miles of coastline, more coastline than all the major cities on the West Coast and the East Coast combined. 2/3 of the world live in coastal cities, all of whom are threatened by sea level rise. So New York City could become the center for research, the center for business development on how coastal cities adapt to rising sea levels, and that can employ untold numbers of people. But we have to have the imagination to see ourselves as leading that way. And the same goes for our 900,000 buildings that need to be retrofitted. We are big enough to actually set the standards for what building maintenance software looks like. And we can actually build the supply chains right here in the city, because we are so big, we can actually force industry to follow our standards, things like that. We have New York has tidal power in our water that's passing through us all the time. We are not tapping that. We could become the center for research and deployment of tidal energy. There's so many things we can do, but we need the imagination to actually do it. And we have one of the most diverse populations on earth, people who speak every language, who understand every culture. So we literally can be the hub for the whole world, where anyone can come and speak in your language and connect with people who can connect back with you to talk about how to solve problems in your country. That is how we need to view our population. Diversity is not a burden. It is actually something that's an asset for our city, but we have to start seeing ourselves that way and seeing our population that way. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Well, that is an incredibly inspirational call to action for all of us, and in particular, Green City Force alum who can become central actors in this vision. Deputy Mayor, we want to thank you for your time. We know you're incredibly busy in the
Can I say one more thing?
Overlapping crises. And go ahead.
To me, this is how we solve the racial wealth gap. It is not by begging white people for reparations. It is actually through envisioning a different future and then acting on it.
That's right. That's right. No, incredibly important. So look, we'll collect questions and comments and thoughts from everyone and make sure that we get them to the Deputy Mayor and his team. Deputy Mayor, we want to thank you for your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.